The latest online rapid tournament organised by the Play Magnus group is underway. The Magnus Carlsen Invitational features 16 of the world's leading players, and well, it's got off to an absolutely cracking start. Some brilliant games, very exciting games, really tense, and I'm going to show you the game between Anish Giri playing white and Magnus Carlsen playing black. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and do subscribe. Lots of you watching aren't subscribers. There are some great videos here on the PowerPlayChess channel. Do check them out. So, Giri playing white has a really nice space advantage. This is a so-called Marozzi bind, where you have these two pawns and they really cramp black in the centre of the board. So Carlsen happy to play this solid system with black. I mean, development is very easy for black, but black doesn't have much space. So moves like a5 are actually very important, which starts to control this square, which means that black can maybe get the c5 square under control. So it's quite a delicate balance, this position actually. There are no weaknesses in black's position, but that means if white presses forward too quickly, you can overextend. But anyway, first of all, Carlsen has to sort out some decent positions for his minor pieces. So that's why this knight swings around, which potentially can come to the c5 square. And he's pretty happy to exchange pieces, because that relieves a little bit of congestion in the position. Now, white can go for it on the kingside, but Giri prefers just to play queen to d4, check. So the queen takes up a good position, and then he just puts a rook in the middle. Very sound and absolutely typical of Giri. And here Carlsen plays queen b6. I think completely understandable decision. You need to be able to exchange pieces here. And, you know, there is potentially some danger to the king. So why not exchange pieces? If the queen ducks back, then of course black has gained ground. So Giri exchanges. It also means for a little moment that knight is very badly placed on b6. But, you know, both sides can be happy. Giri still has his space advantage, and now he starts to advance on the king side. If he followed up with g4 and h4, you know, put the king on g3, started, you know, g5, h5, could be rather nasty. Basically, I think Carlsen has to do something here. Otherwise, he'll just get squashed. You know, it's hard to advance on the queen side, because that pawn will just advance here. So Carlsen plays f5, and I think that's absolutely correct. And it also makes good use of that bishop on c6. Pressure here. So Giri exchanges. Good, yeah, I think exchanging is certainly the best move. And here, well, I think it's quite a tough decision actually. I, in principle, would like to play pawn takes, but it's still not easy. You know, this rook can maybe hassle the king. The other rook comes over, maybe bishop f3, maybe bishop h5. And there is going to be pressure on these pawns. So Carlsen played rook takes f5. And here is his idea. So he's knocking away that pawn on f4, which means he has greater control in the middle of the board. You know, those centre pawns don't look bad. But still, tricky position. Bishop hits the rook, which comes to the side. Rook e1. Right, here we can see. Still a bit of pressure here. So pawn takes pawn, rook takes pawn on e7. Not so clear for black. Not very pleasant. So rook e8. A little bit passive, but then again, well, the king didn't want to move up because that pawn could be taken. Knight e4. So Giri takes the opportunity to force an exchange here. This is a strong piece on c6. But here, Carlsen has to exchange off bishop for knight. If the rook moves away, there's going to be a nasty discovered attack. So bishop takes knight is forced. But that leaves Giri with the superior minor piece. This bishop is certainly better than the knight on b6. Which is why Carlsen exchanges on f4 and then brings the knight back into the middle. So it can look to land on the beautiful e5 square or possibly f6 as well. But still, this is a pleasant position for white. You can see Giri has been able to use his greater space to activate his rooks, and this is a little bit unpleasant for Carlsen. Knight e5, okay, that doesn't look bad, but still this bishop looking at both sides of the board looks pretty nice for white. b5, again a logical move. So Carlsen is chipping around the edges of white's pawn structure, and that means that, well, he's left himself with two very nice centre pawns, normally very desirable, because if you can get those rolling, then black starts to control the centre, push white's pieces out of the way. The only problem is getting them rolling is really difficult. Rook h4, because white's pieces are so active here. Now, this is a crunch moment in the game. And here, Carlsen invested quite a bit of time in making a decision. Obviously, that pawn here is under attack. So what do you do about that? Okay, I'll have a little slurp tea. You have a little think. Well, Carlsen decided to ditch that pawn. He could have defended passively with knight g6, but I have a feeling he was wary about this little sequence of exchanges, something like this, and then the white king starts to head towards the queen side very quickly, and that is tricky. That knight does not defend against distant passed pawns very easily. Now, if you look at that with a computer, it says that black is fine. Tricky position though. So Carlsen decided to give up that pawn. So Giri now a pawn up. But after this move, Carlsen is hoping that, with this pawn isolated, his rook looks pretty active now. The knight also obviously on a very, very good square, that perhaps there's enough to hold this position. So rook e2, defending the pawn here. Now, of course, black would love to play a move like rook here to put more pressure, but of course that bishop doing a superb job looking in all directions of the board. So Carlsen decided to exchange rooks, which does take some pressure off his king, because there was always the option sometimes to check with the rook, and in combination with the bishop, that's tricky. So we have a simplified position with Giri still a pawn up. So no doubt who's better here. The only question is, could Carlsen hold it? He was no doubt hoping that his knight would be very tricky, as they often are in rapid play. So let's see. Rook a5 and the bishop comes to b3. Now, I think Giri's maneuver here, putting the bishop to b3 supported by the pawn, an excellent move. Minor pieces need good protection. That knight is well protected. The bishop is now well protected. Giri's plan is not to advance that a pawn. Well, not anytime soon. Let's just keep it back here, because now he doesn't need to worry about the bishop or the pawn, and he can concentrate on the other side of the board. And this is not an easy position for black, because Carlsen wants to get his pawns going. But how do you do that here? Rook d2, good move, covering d4. So now white's plan is very easy. Giri is just going to advance his kingside pawns with the help of the king. g4, king g3, h4, and so on. And at this point, Carlsen obviously thought, okay, this is a problem. If I sit there, I'm just going to be rolled away here. So he started to fish around for a plan. Knight d7. Rook e2. Hits the pawn. If the knight goes back, then just g4. So king f8. Rook check, knight f6. Right, we can see what his plan is. Basically, he's cleared the knight out of the way so that he can potentially push these pawns. g4. Okay, the king comes here. So that king was in a pin. Got to be really careful. Rook f4. Now, this is a good move, because Giri realizes that actually once these pawns start to advance, then that rook could well swing across to hassle the king. Excellent move. So yeah, for example, e5, rook c4, and this is already quite nasty. So d5 played by Carlsen, shutting out the bishop and leaving the pawn on e7, which does give the king some protection. But still, g5, it's an unpleasant move for black to face. If the knight goes back, let's say here, just h4, we'll keep pushing these guys. And if e5, rook b4, now that's what I'm talking about. That rook can swing to the side, already very, very problematic. And this pawn is potentially loose as well. So after g5, Carlsen threw the knight into e4. Fine, normally that's where you'd want the knight, but bishop takes pawn. And if rook takes, rook takes. Now here's the trick. If rook takes pawn, check. Rook g4 exchanges rooks and gives white a winning king and pawn endgame. And obviously this position is, well, that's very, very easy for white with connected passed pawns. So bishop takes pawn plate, knight takes pawn, and the bishop shoots back to b3 where it's completely safe. So after that little transaction, Giri's still a pawn up. Carlsen still looking for counterplay. e5, rook a4, good move. Now if the rooks are exchanged, it's very hard for black to deal with that pawn. Really nasty. Knights are not good at stopping distant passed pawns. So Carlsen simply avoided the exchange. Rook c4. Giri is tormenting him by offering the exchange again. But he's found a superb position for his rook with that little bit of chasing, because he can now really plague black's king. h4, driving the knight back. Rook a4, Giri's enjoying himself. So if the rook moves to the side, then he's going to check, potentially on the 7th rank. Or, oh no, excuse me, of course. I beg your pardon, the knight can actually be taken, so the rook cannot move to c5 at all. Right, so in this position, knight f4 check. King comes to f3 and then rook c5. And now Giri has a little bit of fun again. Let's just push that rook back to a worse square. And now he comes in with check. And here, this is a big moment in the game. Where would you put the king? Well, Carlsen plays the king to h6. I mean, I think he should have gone to f6. And this is not a nice position. Let's be clear. I think this is a nice move, rook d6, to control the knight and then bring the king in and start to advance. And very difficult for black. But king h6, well, what happens now? Bishop c2. Ooh, nasty, threatening a mate on h7. Rook a3 check. King comes up. Knight d3. Blocking the bishop, so preventing rook h7 mate, but still it looks precarious with that knight on d3. King f5. Okay, the king moving over. Sometimes it'll be simply possible to exchange here, take here, and win with the a pawn because black's king is so far away. So all the pressure on Carlsen. Now, he should have tried knight f4 and it's still tricky, but he played knight b4. Bishop e4, what a beautiful move. Dominating black's knight. I'm afraid, what's the opposite of an octopus knight? It's a shrimp knight, I'm afraid. It's not great. That bishop just dominating. And here, well, knight d3 had to be tried, but it's looking lost. But the game ended like this. Rook takes pawn. And now, white play and win. King g4. Beautiful move. The rook threatens rook h7 mate. And that is game over. Nasty stuff. You can see that rook can't check on g2. Well, it can, but it'll be taken. So that's basically the end of that. So you can see the rook and knight completely dominated by white's pieces there. That killer bishop against the knight. Beautiful technical performance from Anish Giri. I have to say, that is his forte. I think Magnus got caught out very badly there. Now, this was in round 4. Both had a pretty good start. The day ended actually with Giri on 4 out of 5, Carlsen on 3.5, along with Levon Aronian also on 3.5. Let me just show you, I mean, there are so many interesting games. Let me show you the finish to Mamedyarov against Dubov. This was sensational. Mamedyarov with the white pieces. You can see he's got rook and bishop against rook and bishop. Mamedyarov is 2 pawns up. Looks like he should be winning. What happens? Dubov finds an amazing resource. He played rook f1, threatening the pawn here. Mamedyarov checked and took the bishop. And now Dubov played rook takes pawn check. King takes rook. And that's stalemate. What a wonderful trick. Stalemate, one of my favourite themes. I often use it in when I'm training. Show some beautiful examples of studies and problems. So there we go. We actually got it in a real game. Fantastic imagination from Daniel Dubov. Thanks for watching. More coming soon. See you tomorrow. Bye.